Hi, you're watching Searching for Shakespeare's House on the Time Team official YouTube channel with me, Tony Robinson. This town was home to perhaps the most celebrated individual in all of British history. He's a mysterious figure. Today, he's world famous. Yet besides his plays, he left astonishingly few traces of his life behind. But now there's a chance to find out more about him than ever before, because a new dig here in Stratford upon Avon is about to uncover his house. The house of William Shakespeare.
Ooh, look at that. Oh, yes.
There'll be plenty of twists and turns along the way.
Would you be a happy man if you'd just found the place where Shakespeare boiled his pants?
But finding the remains could reveal much more about the hidden private life of the world's greatest writer. So this could actually have been a floor Shakespeare walked on. There's only a few weeks of the dig left, and the pressure's on to make the most of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get really intimate with one of Britain's greatest sons. This is Stratford upon Avon, where a team of archaeologists are digging the site of what was, 400 years ago, the town's biggest private house. There's not much of it left above the ground now, so what's all the fuss about? Well, at the time, it was the home of a local man who was beginning to make quite a name for himself. William Shakespeare. Shakespeare has made Stratford a magnet for around 3 million tourists a year. But until now, there's one thing none of them have got to see, and in many ways, it's the most intriguing. This site is where Shakespeare's own house once stood. The house that he bought in his 30s, where his wife lived, where his kids were brought up, where he eventually retired to and finally died in. It could be key to understanding more about the person who wrote all those fantastic plays. Digging here are a team from Birmingham University, hoping to pinpoint the precise location of Shakespeare's house. They want to discover its size, its layout, and just what it can tell us about Shakespeare's private life. Time Team's Phil Harding's going to be exploring the site, alongside Project Officer Will Mitchell, who's already started to uncover one crucial area.
I tell you now, this looks like real archaeology.
Yeah, and this is what we're really interested in, this area of brickwork.
I mean, they look like those very narrow Tudor bricks.
It could be, it's looking like it could be a floor. They look like they're Tudor bricks, so this could be it.
The thing is, this is really, really constricted. You need to see more. I mean, if these are the foundations of Shakespeare's house, that is really, really important. Do you plan to extend the trench?
We're able to put a little trench in today.
We can do it today?
We can.
Shall I get a shovel?
Let's do it.
Doop, doop, the doop-a-doop-doop.
Phil's sinking his spade into ground that we don't think has ever been dug before, so there's no telling what he might find. But what kind of structure are we looking for? Shakespeare's house was called New Place, and it was Tudor Stratford's biggest private home, with up to 20 rooms and a dozen servants. But in 1702, the bard's house was lost, demolished to make way for an elegant pile in the very latest style. That new house sat right on the street, so reasonably enough, that's where previous digs have gone looking for Shakespeare's home. In the 19th century, archaeologists digging there uncovered just enough traces of Tudor wall to conclude that they'd found Shakespeare's house. But here's the twist. We now know something that they didn't. What is that?
Well, this is a very, very important document which came to light after the 19th century excavations. And what it is a description and a plan of the house that Shakespeare lived in.
So this is Shakespeare's house?
This is Shakespeare's house, but it's only drawn from memory. Of far greater importance in terms of the archaeology is this sketch plan that was drawn, how the site was laid out. And what this demonstrates is a very narrow range, almost a gatehouse, along the street frontage. Courtyard and lawn areas behind, and then the main grand house that Shakespeare would have lived in is over there.
Oh, I see. So somewhere where those boards are, there would have been a gate, and then this narrow range, and then there'd have been courtyards where we're standing now, and then behind it would have been Shakespeare's living quarters.
Exactly, and what's important is that area has not been dug out before.
So if you find them there, then actually you'll have located his living quarters, which is something that people have been trying to do unsuccessfully for over 100 years.
The house that Shakespeare lived in.
So there's not much pressure on you, really, is there?
Yes, there is.
If the plan's accurate, then Phil's digging right where the main part of Shakespeare's house stood. But what could finding it reveal about the obscure private life of our greatest national hero? Well, if New Place really did have a gatehouse and a courtyard, then its layout would have resembled the very finest Tudor residences. Almost a miniature version of Hampton Court Palace. Meaning this wasn't just Stratford's biggest private house, it was far and away the grandest. Question is, just how did William Shakespeare come to own such a palatial home? Already, we're closing in on the archaeology.
Yeah, so I've got a bit more coming up over here as well.
Yeah, that's it, see. It's that very, very white lime mortar, isn't it?
Although this does look very different around here
Yeah.
to what I've got here. We've got a darker deposit over the top of it.
Could Phil really have struck on the foundations of Shakespeare's house at the first attempt? Only a lot more digging will tell. But what I really want to find out is more about Shakespeare the man, and what made him set his sights on owning Stratford's grandest house. William Shakespeare was born in 1564. His father John was a glove maker and all-round wheeler-dealer, and for a time the Shakespeares prospered. Soon, though, John Shakespeare's shady dealings saw him fall into financial ruin and social disgrace, and before long, his teenage son was up to his neck in it too. As Time Team's Mariana Hotter is discovering.
Paul, this isn't just Shakespeare's birthplace, is it? This house has more of a role to play in his life.
It's where he started his early adult life. He gets married much too young at the age of 18. His wife, Anne Hathaway, is already 3 months pregnant. People didn't get married until about the age of 24 in Stratford, so he's much too young. He makes a mess of things. So he comes here, I should think, with his wife, and his daughter's born here as well, Susanna, and all of his other family are around him, his 5 brothers and sisters.
5 siblings and 3 generations all in a house and a glove-making industry. They're pretty packed in here, aren't they?
I think, you know, Shakespeare would have been expected to help out with the glove-making business, making the leather out of the back, helping your father sell the gloves, make the gloves. You'd need all hands on deck.
It was about as unpromising a beginning as Shakespeare could have had. But perhaps it was this early hardship and social stigma that gave him the determination to succeed and to restore his family's reputation in Stratford by buying the town's swankiest residence. Back on site, Phil's well underway in his search for the foundations of that house. But perhaps there's something I should have told him. Just down the road from New Place is Holy Trinity Church. It's where Shakespeare was baptised. But more importantly for the dig, it's where he was buried. Why more importantly? Well, this is Shakespeare's grave, and on it there's a very famous curse. It says, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones." Well, we're not planning to shift Shakespeare's bones, although we are moving quite a lot of dust at his house. Let's hope the curse doesn't extend to his property.
If you want us to investigate more sites, you can make it happen. So, help us reach 10,000 members on Patreon.
In Stratford upon Avon, a new document has revealed that William Shakespeare's house was the town's grandest, set back from the street with a gatehouse and courtyard. If the dig can confirm this, it could get us closer to understanding how Shakespeare lived and what made him tick. I'll say one thing about doing archaeology in a tourist town. It's a darn sight more comfortable than doing it in a field slap bang in the middle of nowhere.
A house called New Place stood on this site from the early 50s.
But while I'm taking in the sites, there's some proper work to be done. And as ever in archaeology, big things start in small holes. On site, Phil Harding and Will Mitchell have uncovered what they think could be a floor, or maybe a wall, of Shakespeare's house.
Oh, what have you got there, Will?
Looks like we've got some bricks just starting to come up.
I mean, wow, that's the third one. We got one there.
Yeah.
We got another one there.
One here.
Another one there.
Curving round in an arc.
I know. And that, by the looks of it, that definitely doesn't look like a Tudor brick.
No, not in this case.
I think we're going to have a serious rethink about what we got here.
The archaeology is proving to be a bit of a puzzle. The team had been pinning all their hopes on these being the foundations of Shakespeare's house, but they're starting to look like something built much later.
Don't like to say it, but how does garden feature strike you?
Well, it's not looking like a wall anymore.
No, it's not.
It's a major setback. But there's an even bigger riddle connected with New Place. Just how did Shakespeare, a man from a humble background, ever come to own it? A mysterious gap in the records means we just don't know how he escaped his dad's provincial glove shop or what he did next. It's a lack of evidence that's so frustrating it's given rise to conspiracy theories that question whether Shakespeare really was the man who wrote all those amazing plays after all. So just where does Shakespeare surface again in the records? Well, he's 28 years old and a world away from sleepy Stratford. What would it have been like for the young Shakespeare to move to London, do you think?
Oh, a very exciting but possibly frightening new experience.
So it really was the country boy coming to the big city?
Yeah, I think so. But it's a city with opportunities.
And what about here in Southwark, where he worked?
Well, this is very exciting because this is the theatre world of London at the time. Every single house on the riverfront was a brothel or a drinking den. Then they had the animal baiting arenas, and then finally they have theatres here as well.
It is rather bizarre, isn't it? We've come here looking for Elizabethan history, but we've ended up outside a 20th century tower block.
Well, there's a lot of history in here.
And it's extraordinary history too. In 1989, archaeologists digging in the block's basement stumbled on a portal into Shakespeare's world. This is a remarkably cold and eerie looking place. What is it?
Well, it's the site of the Rose Playhouse, one of the earliest, most important playhouses in Shakespeare's London.
So what are these red lights?
Well, that's it. They're showing the outline of the walls, and we're walking in the galleries, the three-tiered galleries here. There's an open yard.
The cheap seats?
That's right,
the cheap standing up,
and
yeah.
at the far end, the stage.
This rectangle?
That's right.
At the far end there. Do we know that Shakespeare actually performed here? Do you
Well,
know?
certainly in the early 1590s, Shakespeare was acting here.
What plays of his were put on here?
Certainly Henry VI and Titus Andronicus were actually premiered on that stage.
And Shakespeare stood on that little stage
Almost
there?
certainly,
Wow.
yes.
The discovery of the Rose Playhouse also turned up a host of finds that bring Shakespeare's early career as a playwright and actor vividly to life. What have we got that's associated with the actors?
Well, I think probably one of the nicest things is this little brush that is almost certainly a cosmetic brush and could well have been used by the actors trying to paint something on. And a tuning fork from something like a bass viol, which was probably used for the musical accompaniments.
What's this one?
Well, this is where we actually move right onto the stage, because it's actually a fragment of a blade of a rapier, a 16th century sword, and it was found on the stage. So this is almost certainly an original stage prop.
A prop sword. A prop sword was one thing, but in Elizabethan England, only a gentleman got to carry the genuine article. William Shakespeare, yet to turn 30, could still only dream of achieving such status, or of the kind of house that went with it. Back in Stratford, the search for the foundations of New Place had seemingly run into trouble. But the curving row of bricks that Phil feared was relatively modern now looks Tudor after all. And that's not the only good news.
Ooh! Oh, look at that. What's going on?
So there may be more of it.
Look at that. Oh, yes. So it's definitely going on outside of that stone there. But how much?
We've discovered a flat surface underneath the arc of bricks. If it's Tudor, it could be just what they'd been hoping for. And there's immediately something very intriguing about it.
They look like they've been burnt.
Burnt? Yeah.
So on one side of the strange brick arc, Phil's got an area that looks as though it's been used for burning. And Will's hit on something too.
Oh, we've got something different coming up in the corner here.
Well, that is different, isn't it? What's that then?
Well, rather than bricks, it looks as if you've got stones. Limestone foundations, perhaps.
I think what we have come down onto is really, really fascinating. I mean, we've got a feature here. We don't exactly know when it was put in, and we don't know why it was put in. But the nice thing about it is that it is all made out of Tudor bricks. These are the bricks that would have been in Shakespeare's house. Now, I know it's not like the key to the front door, but I still feel, yeah, I'd like to feel that we're actually getting there and that we are getting a little bit closer to Shakespeare's house.
If Phil's right and the feature is Tudor, it could be what the archaeologists have been hoping for, the actual bricks and mortar of Shakespeare's house. But while he's busy digging, I still want to know how Shakespeare got his hands on this palatial home. And in the Stratford town records, we can get a glimpse of a man we rarely get to see. Not Shakespeare the bard, but Shakespeare the first-time buyer.
The document that we've got here, which is dated 1597, records Shakespeare's purchase of New Place in that year. And in fact, William Shakespeare, you can see his name there. This 33-year-old young man was perhaps the least illustrious of people who, at that time, had been connected with the property.
How much did it cost him?
He paid £120 for it.
What do you think that would have been worth in today's money?
I guess one way to think about that would be that I gather Shakespeare was paid £6 for writing a play.
Well, he's supposed to have written 2 plays a year, so that would be 10 years' work.
Indeed.
He must have really felt that he was on the up, though, mustn't he, if he was prepared to take the risk of making a big purchase like that? He
must indeed, and the picture that you very much get of Shakespeare in this document and others is very much that of a businessman beginning to prosper, yes.
The purchase of New Place has certainly fuelled the conspiracy theories about William Shakespeare's identity. Just where did a young man from modest roots get so much ready cash? In reality, it looks like Shakespeare inherited his father's taste for wheeling and dealing, and perhaps for him, the purchase of New Place was about more than just the money. Was it also the cornerstone of a scheme to restore his family's good name in Stratford? What exactly the team has found of his house, though, isn't yet clear. Back on site, architectural historian Jonathan Foyle has arrived to cast an expert eye over our bricks and to help figure out just where they fitted into Shakespeare's house.
And I recognise those bricks. We're talking Tudor now, aren't we?
We are, yes. This is the most interesting thing that we've found recently.
So what do you make of that arc of bricks?
Yes, they're Tudor bricks, so they're like the same material the floor's made from. At the moment, we're going with the fact that most of the burnt bricks are actually inside that curve, so suggesting that that contained the burning within.
Well, is it sloping? Is that brick floor sloping in any way?
It is sloping, but I think the problem is that that area has been disturbed.
What does a sloping floor indicate?
Well, in a Tudor great house, typically a brick floor sloping toward a gully is indicative of a laundry.
Why are they burning their laundry?
you have to boil like billio in the old days before detergents turned up. And so if you've got lots of white linens, ruffs and so on, and white shirts, you've got to stick them in a big copper and boil them at high temperatures. So there's a lot of mess, actually, in a Tudor laundry.
So we might have Shakespeare's laundry, but we haven't got Shakespeare's living room, bedroom, drawing room, reception room.
Not yet.
Right.
Fingers crossed.
One question though, Kevin. If we didn't find any of that stuff, would you be a happy man if you'd just found the place where Shakespeare boiled his pants?
That's more information than we knew before, so I'd be happy with that.
Good stuff.
So what have we really got here, apart from a sniff of Shakespeare's underpants? What the archaeologists are hoping to find is a really substantial house, which their document seems to show sat right here on the site. But if what they've actually got is a laundry or a service building, as the burnt brick suggests, then it would have stood outside the main living quarters, meaning that at the moment Shakespeare's house is proving about as tricky to pin down as the man himself. But perhaps there's one thing about it that's a little easier to figure out, something I've been dying to know, just what this house would have looked like. Our 18th century document, based on an eyewitness account, seems to show the front of Shakespeare's house in honest-to-goodness pen and ink, and in quite a bit of detail too. You only have to walk a few yards from the site of New Place to get a very vivid picture of what Shakespeare's house would have looked like. You could virtually pick up this house with its 5 gables, dump it down on our site, and it would be a dead ringer for the 18th century sketch. But wait for it, there's one small problem. Just about every Tudor house in Stratford sits flush with the street. And yet the ground plan of New Place on our document shows Shakespeare's house set back from the street, behind a courtyard and a gatehouse. So does the drawing show the main house that the Shakespeare family lived in, or just the gatehouse where the servants bunked down? When I first came to this place, I thought it's going to be a real doddle to dig, but the longer that we've been here, the more I realise that this drawing offers us more problems than it does solutions.
It's certainly quite a confusing drawing, really, and it's really difficult to try and find out where this house sat on the plot.
So this could have been right here on the road.
Yes.
In which case it would have been the gatehouse, wouldn't it?
It would have been the gatehouse.
Or this could have been what you saw when you walked through the gatehouse, and this is actually over there somewhere.
It's somewhere ahead of us, yeah.
So if you'd stood in the courtyard of New Place back in Shakespeare's time, you might have found yourself admiring a house like this. But given that it's got a big gate in the middle of it, it seems much more likely that this was in fact the gatehouse. In which case, the drawing gives us absolutely no idea what the building that Shakespeare actually lived in looked like, let alone how big it was or even where exactly it stood. It's a right old archaeological muddle. So can our right old archaeologist help them sort it out?
So I guess there's 2 ways for you to actually resolve this. One would be to go down, but the other way would be to go out and really open a bigger area and actually see this how this actually fits into the whole context of the site.
Absolutely. I think we'd love to be able to open up a bigger area here, but there's a problem in the shape of a mulberry tree. It's supposed to be a distant cousin of a mulberry tree that William Shakespeare planted in the back garden.
People actually believe that Shakespeare is related to that tree?
There's a misconception, yes. It was actually planted in 1946. Now, unfortunately, we're not allowed to move within 5.8 metres of it. So we can't actually go any further that way, and we can't actually go any further that way.
So it's back to first principles, you'll have to go down.
That's the plan.
So together we brought Time Team back, and now we're going to take Time Team to the next level. Help us achieve 10,000 ongoing members on Patreon.
We're in Stratford upon Avon on a hunt for the site of Shakespeare's grand house, New Place. No one's ever managed to find it before, but our search has hit a snag in the shape of a mulberry tree. The tree's protected status has stopped the archaeologists just as their trench was getting interesting. So what have they got so far? Well, you could say a pile of old bricks, but where Shakespeare's concerned, even bricks have got a bit of magic to them. So this could actually have been a floor that Shakespeare walked on?
Absolutely amazing archaeology, really interesting.
Although, on the other hand, presumably, it could be somebody later who found a load of bricks from Shakespeare's house lying around and remodelled them into some sort of garden feature or something.
Absolutely. So what we need to do now is to excavate around it and, crucially, try and get some evidence underneath the floor as to what date it is.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Anything else you can do?
I think the only other thing we can do with the tree being here is to do some geophysics.
Well, I know someone will do that. Badly, but he will do it. With the shovels sidelined thanks to the mulberry tree, it's time to try ground-penetrating radar. No one's ever done geophys here before, so Jimmy Adcock's survey could provide a major breakthrough, potentially even revealing the foundations and layout of New Place. And while Jimmy's busy microwaving the lawn, there's another area of the site to explore. In what we think was New Place's courtyard, the team have found a pit that could reveal just what Shakespeare got up to here once he'd got his hands on the house.
I mean, it's an enormous hole where you can see where the edge has been cut through all the natural gravels, and it goes all the way around there, all the way back down here. This here is the actual filling of the pit, and it's extended underneath this walkway here. It's massive, but crucially, what's its date?
The date of the thing is the very important fact. We've had lots and lots of high-status pottery coming out of this, which all date to around 1550 to 1600. And what's interesting is we had a lot of building material as well. If you look behind you, you've got stone and brick tile.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've got bits there of just clay roof tiles and bits here of bits of stone roof tile.
All of this seems to suggest that what we've got here is a rubbish pit and one that dates from Shakespeare's time. But just why is it full of building rubble? Well, we know from local records that 4 decades before Shakespeare bought New Place, the house was falling into disrepair. There's no evidence it was ever fixed up, and it might even have been left standing empty. So was what Shakespeare bought really such a grand house? Or was it, in fact, a dilapidated heap in need of substantial rebuilding and a substantial rubbish pit for the rubble? Jermaine, if you and I had been Mr. and Mrs. Shakespeare in the garden of New Place in the 1590s, thinking of buying a new house, what would we have seen over there that would have been so attractive that would have made us want to buy it?
It may not have been attractive at all. One good thing about it was that it wasn't burnt. Stratford had undergone 2 absolutely devastating fires, and people had the responsibility to restore their properties. And I would imagine that what was happening was that people were pinching building material.
The Stratford fires destroyed almost half of the town's buildings, but left New Place unscathed. Until, that is, the townsfolk started stripping the empty house of all the bricks, timber and tiles they could carry.
It was not the des res. It was an undesirable residence that Anne Shakespeare took on.
So you think that Anne would have been actively involved in transforming New Place into somewhere the Shakespeares would have wanted to live in?
I think she would have actually done it. I mean, Shakespeare's busy. It's 1597. He's 4 years before he writes Hamlet. You know, he's got the major part of his career ahead of him. Now, she's the person who was here all the time. So she was the person who would have rebuilt the house. You know, you can't just call in a firm of architects in 1597.
So if we're right, Shakespeare's house got the grand designs treatment, Tudor style, with Anne Shakespeare acting as site manager. She was overseeing its transformation from a 100-year-old heap to a swanky abode rebuilt in the latest fashion. And what of William, while his wife Anne was keeping an eye on the builders. Well, he certainly wasn't hanging around New Place. He probably never spent more than a few weeks a year there. His life was still in London, where plays like Romeo and Juliet were getting plenty of pantaloons on seats. And his quest to clamber up the social ladder was going pretty well too. Shakespeare had even acquired a costly coat of arms, something unheard of for a playwright. His father had tried it and failed, but William's London connections saw him right. The ragtag lad from Stratford was now officially a gentleman, and he got himself a sword to show it. And as for the coat of arms, well, it almost certainly went on display over the door of the new place. The Shakespeare family name had been restored and improved as surely as the house itself. This is the garden behind New Place, and as you can see, it's pretty substantial, and in Shakespeare's day it would have been even bigger. We know there were 2 barns here, and a cottage and an orchard, and they kept animals here. But the archaeologists have discovered a particularly interesting feature. What exactly is it?
We're standing in an area of the house which would have been along the side of the courtyard. And we've got kind of this group of stone platforms here.
I can see that one.
Yeah, there's 1, 2 there, and then a third one behind us.
Yeah.
And they may have held vats or ovens.
And what about this depression with the stones around it?
Yeah, this is a stone and clay-lined pit, so it would have held a liquid.
So what are they doing here?
Well, it could possibly be a brew house.
A brew house? Well, I know someone who'll be very interested in that. So anyone fancy a visit to Shakespeare's mum's house? Mary Arden's farm stands just outside Stratford, and today it's a living history museum. Just the spot to find out why New Place might have needed its own brew house.
Sarah, I understand that William Shakespeare got through quite a drop of ale. I mean, was this a hobby of his?
No, everybody was an enthusiastic beer drinker of the period.
There was a good reason to be so enthusiastic. Beer was much safer to drink than water. The Tudors didn't know why, but the secret was very simple. You started your brewing by boiling the water.
We've got malted barley here.
Right.
Have a
So,
sniff.
oh yes, it's that smell, isn't it? And I suppose that's a smell that would have been all the way through Stratford.
Would have been one of the nicer smells.
Ah, well, yes, I know.
While smaller households could buy ale in, New Place had servants as well as family to provide for. A male servant was entitled to 8 pints of ale a day, a female servant to 6. So the Shakespeare's brew house could have been turning out 1,000 pints a week.
The next step is splurging.
Splurging? What's it mean?
It's basically just squeezing all the goodness out of that malt that's in there before we use it in the next brew.
It really does look most unappetising.
Ditch water.
I've got to do this. Oh, it is awful. It really is sweet, isn't it?
Each ale took about 4 days to mature in the cask and had a unique and unpredictable taste.
That ain't too bad. Genuinely, that ain't bad.
It's very pleasant, isn't it?
That is very pleasant. So a few pints of this.
Yes, you'll be well merry.
Well, you feel like knocking off a few sonnets, wouldn't you, really?
The thought of Phil's sonnets certainly makes me feel like having a drink.
Oh well. Only 7 more pints to go. They had a right old life in the Tudor period, didn't they?
We're starting to get a really vivid picture of life at New Place. A brew house that could churn out ale by the gallon, accommodation in the gatehouse for up to 12 servants, almost an acre of gardens with barns for malt and orchards, not to mention the grand house itself. But just where is this house? Back on site, the archaeologists have been using radar in an attempt to pinpoint its foundations, and this could be their last chance to find them.
For me, I see a line coming across here, and then I see something running parallel.
Yeah.
Which is more or less the general direction of where these cross walls of your Tudor building would be.
It's about the right area, yes.
Are those walls?
Let's take this top one first.
All right.
If you just look over my shoulder, you'll see a manhole cover.
Ah.
That's your first clue that might not be a wall.
A service, okay.
And the second one, which runs underneath the mulberry tree, just down from where you were digging in that trench.
Of course, is another service.
Yeah, there's a stone-capped culvert running through there.
It looks as though, for the time being, the mulberry tree is safe.
Well, it's safe-ish.
So the geophys has failed to find the slightest trace of Tudor foundations. Once again, Shakespeare's house has given us the slip. The dig's been going on for months now, and what have we got so far? We've got this trench here, which we can't extend because of that mulberry tree, and we've got geophys that's drawn a blank. Now, you could say, yeah, but that's just time team. On the other hand, I can't help wondering, are we being haunted by the curse on Shakespeare's tomb? No, of course not.
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon. Your ongoing membership enables us to develop more sites and more episodes.
William Shakespeare's not just a national hero, he's our international cultural superstar. But even though he was one of us, a Midlands lad with a baldy head, we know next to nothing about him. Finding his house could get us just that little bit closer. But finding it's proving easier said than done. So what else do you try when you're having a poke around for William Shakespeare? Well, tons and tons of soil have already been dug out of the site, so you'd expect to find some traces of a poet in residence. There's a bit of a problem, though. Shakespeare lived on this site for a couple of decades, out of a history going back for centuries. So trying to find any evidence of him is a bit of an archaeological needle in a haystack. So every day, volunteers come here and they scrutinise and sieve every bit of earth that's being dug up. William Shakespeare's so revered, yet so shadowy, that even the smallest find that's directly linked to him would be a kind of cultural holy relic. So, have they actually turned up anything that could throw light on the kind of life he was living here? This stuff doesn't look local.
No, these are imported. These are from Germany. So this shows the kind of things which Shakespeare was kind of bringing in and to show off, I suppose.
So it confirms this notion that it's a high-status family. They haven't just got a big house, it's a big house full of really quite posh stuff.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Including that weird-looking object.
Yeah, this one's really interesting. This is a handle from a knife or perhaps a small spoon or something like that. It's got a metal fitting on one end and it's been worked.
It's just scratch?
Yeah, they've got little designs of flowers just scratched onto it. So this is perhaps the scrawlings of a child. So this is, again, contemporary. Could have belonged to Shakespeare or his daughters.
And what about that?
Yeah, we find a lot of bone on site. This is a bobbin, we've got a button here, and then a cribbage peg.
So this could have been Shakespeare, couldn't it? Shakespeare could have actually scored with this 15-2, 15-4 and 3 for a run like they do in cribbage. Yeah. Mind you, he might not have. I think all the conspiracies and curses must be going to my head. Still, the finds do suggest that life for the Shakespeares in New Place was good. This was a gentleman's house, well furnished and tended by up to a dozen servants. So just where was the money to run it coming from? Well, William certainly wasn't spending much time sitting around his Stratford hearth. By the end of the 16th century, his career was peaking. He'd just written Hamlet, Henry V and Julius Caesar, and his working life was still anchored in London. And as it turns out, William Shakespeare hadn't finished dabbling in the real estate market. In 1599, he went into an arrangement to buy a share in a large London property. It was much bigger than New Place, but unlike New Place, it generated income rather than just swallowing it up. It's the Globe Theatre. You really do get a sense of what Shakespeare's world must have been like when you're here, don't you? How many people do you reckon they would have crammed into here?
Probably anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000 people.
Into this little space?
Into this space.
It would have been rammed with 3,000 people.
Absolutely.
So well, one thing that strikes me is that if you're playing a play in a field, well, then everybody can go away without paying. But here, you're able to collect that money.
Yes, they would have had what they call gatherers at the door collecting a penny in these sort of money boxes.
Oh, is that really is a 16th century money box?
Yes, and they would have put the money through this slot here and then smashed it at the end of the evening to get the takings.
There is something quite amusing and a little bit desperate about the fact that he was trying to be a gentleman up in Stratford with his great big house and lording it over people, but down here the money was being generated in a place which must have seemed pretty disreputable to a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. They used to refer to them as the chapels of Satan or temples of Satan.
And yet they're trying to do it up to make it look a bit posh with all this marbling and the classical friezes on the wall, while making a lot of money at the same time.
Absolutely.
The glover's son from Stratford had managed to turn literary talent into cold hard cash and back in his hometown into status and property. But are we ever going to find that property? A protected mulberry tree has stopped the main trench in its tracks. So now Kevin Coles and his team are uncovering a wall first discovered by Victorian archaeologists. They thought it was part of the 18th century house that replaced Shakespeare's and so of little interest. But we now think that this might be where the main part of Shakespeare's house stood. If these foundations turn out to be Tudor, then we might have our first definite trace of Shakespeare's living quarters, and we may finally be able to understand just how our brick feature fits into it.
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
It's going very well, Phil.
Can I come in?
Of course.
Right, coming down here. Ooh, now this has really come on.
Yeah, we've got the brick surface that you know about. We now know that that's sat on material that's got 14th century material in it. So we're happy with that.
Are you telling me you think this is Tudor in date?
We think it's Tudor now, yes. We think it's sat on top of 14th, early 15th century deposits. And if you add on to that the fact that they're Tudor bricks, then we're happy to say it's Tudor.
So that's the first piece of encouraging news. How does it relate to this wall?
Yes, this wall, again, very interesting. We've revealed this really nice limestone foundation. It's made from similar material to the other Tudor foundations across the front of the site. So that being limestone blocks, irregular in shape, and with no brickwork within it.
These foundations look like the breakthrough the team's been waiting for. They're exactly like the Tudor foundations that the Victorian archaeologists found at the front of the site. Foundations we now think belong to the gatehouse and side range. What's more, all the Tudor foundations we've discovered align perfectly, suggesting they belong to the same set of buildings. It all seems to back up what our 18th century document suggested. That Shakespeare's main house really was a grand affair, set back behind a courtyard and a gatehouse. And if all that's not enough for you, we now also have a context for our puzzling pile of bricks.
So what we can say now is that that brick floor is inside a Tudor house.
We're saying that if this is in fact the foundations of the house, then this would place us now inside the property.
And what we can say is that it's a room with a considerable amount of burning in it.
It's really like we're filling in a bit of the jigsaw puzzle as we go.
It must be incredibly satisfying.
We're moving on with it. That's the main thing. So we're quite happy.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
In 1610, William Shakespeare wrote The Tempest, his last major play. 3 years later, the Globe Theatre burnt down. Now in his early 50s, Shakespeare may finally have chosen to return to Stratford to make New Place his full-time home. But we just don't know for sure. Even as a renowned playwright, Shakespeare kept his secrets and left very little trace for us in the records. But one thing we do know. On April the 23rd, 1616, William Shakespeare died at home in New Place. Some people say he'd contracted the typhus that sprang up in Stratford that year. New Place certainly had a little stream running alongside of it, which could have been a carrier for waterborne disease. In his will, he left the house to his elder daughter, Susanna, who lived there for the rest of her life, probably with her mother, Anne. Shakespeare was laid to rest in front of the altar of Holy Trinity Church, where his bones have remained undisturbed for 4 centuries, under the watchful eye of his own likeness. But has the dig succeeded in bringing his house back to the light of day? Right, lads, the dig's almost over. Time for the big, uncomfortable question. Have we got Shakespeare's house?
Well, it's been a very long season's digging, but we've got some very positive results. Where we're standing at the moment, there's a structure in front of us here, which suggests that we are in a building now. We've also got a Tudor brick surface here and a possible hearth, so it's all looking good to suggest that there was a structure out the back where we're standing.
You know, having been with you guys for some time, it seems to me very plausible, particularly if Anne Hathaway was running the house, that you might have this very grand front with which Shakespeare could impress the neighbours, but behind it possibly a much more homely, discreet house where they could look after the kids and do all the other things that a family does.
Yes, I think a very posh front and much more subtle buildings out the back might be a theory that would work.
If we're right, Shakespeare's house was designed to make as big an impression as one of his plays. Its 3-storey gatehouse, rebuilt in the very latest style, suggested an enormous palatial dwelling. Step under Shakespeare's coat of arms and through the gate, though, and the truth was a little different. There was a grassy courtyard, and to the side a row of service buildings, including a brew house. Beyond these was the main house itself. Surprisingly, this might have been less grand in scale and appearance than the gatehouse, a manageable and functional home for a busy Tudor family. So even though the archaeology here isn't huge, this still could be the fireplace right there where Shakespeare toasted his toes and maybe even wrote his plays.
Absolutely, he might have been standing somewhere where you are now.
I'd like to think so. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.